The 1980s were a turbulent time for the American automotive industry. The golden age of raw horsepower from the late 1960s and early 1970s had faded, replaced by fuel restrictions, government regulations, and changing consumer expectations. Dodge, a brand once deeply tied to muscle car glory, was forced to navigate this new era with creativity, compromises, and occasional brilliance. Some vehicles carried the muscle car spirit forward in unexpected ways, while others left enthusiasts scratching their heads. When people think of Dodge muscle cars, they imagine tire-shredding power, big V8 engines, and rear-wheel drive dominance. But the 1980s changed that equation. Instead, Dodge began experimenting with turbocharged four-cylinders, front-wheel drive layouts, and compact platforms. Some of these experiments worked, delivering surprising performance for the time. Others, however, have gone down as cautionary tales. Today, we'll break down the 7 worst Dodge muscle cars of the 1980s, followed by the 6 best examples that managed to salvage the brand's reputation in a difficult decade. Dodge in the 1980s. By the late 1970s, Dodge was facing a crisis. The oil embargo had reshaped consumer behavior, and suddenly, large displacement V8 weren't the hot ticket they once were. Emissions regulations slashed horsepower across the board, while insurance premiums for muscle cars skyrocketed. Chrysler Corporation, Dodge's parent company, was also struggling financially. In this climate, Dodge had to reinvent what performance meant. Instead of brute force muscle, Dodge began exploring turbocharging and compact, front-wheel drive cars. These weren't traditional muscle cars, but they represented a survival strategy. The company leaned heavily on partnerships with Carroll Shelby, a name synonymous with performance. Together, they created vehicles that defied expectations. Yet, for every success, there were failures. Dodge stretched the definition of muscle so far that enthusiasts often didn't recognize what was being sold to them. That duality, innovation alongside compromise, defines Dodge's 1980s lineup. The 7 worst Dodge muscle cars of the 1980s. Number 7, 1982 to 1987. Dodge 400, 600 Sport Trims. Dodge tried hard to dress up the 400 and 600 with sport trims, hoping buyers wouldn't notice what was actually under the hood. The truth was impossible to hide. With small 4-cylinder engines and an occasional underwhelming V6, horsepower barely pushed past the 100 mark. That's not exactly the kind of number that stirs excitement. The cars carried extra weight, making them feel sluggish even when new. Dodge added stripes, badges, and styling tweaks to create the illusion of performance, but enthusiasts quickly saw through the act. The market wasn't impressed either, leaving these models as footnotes in Dodge's attempts at sporty credibility from they looked the part from some angles, but performance never followed, making them the kind of sport trim that lived more in name than in reality. Number 6, 1981 to 1987. Dodge Aries Sport Editions. The Dodge Aries had a clear purpose when it was launched: affordable, practical transportation on Chrysler's K platform. Then Dodge decided to get ambitious by introducing sport editions. Unfortunately, there was nothing sporty about them beyond cosmetic flourishes. Stripes, decals, and slight trim differences didn't cover the fact that acceleration was sluggish and handling uninspired. The Aries was always more about getting families from A to B reliably, not about delivering excitement behind the wheel. For Dodge to market it otherwise was optimistic at best and misleading at worst. These so-called sport editions ended up being little more than economy cars with a marketing pitch that didn't land. Buyers who expected something with muscle found out quickly that this wasn't it. Number 5. 1984 to 1987. Dodge Charger. The Dodge Charger name carried enormous weight thanks to its legendary 1960s predecessors. But the base versions of the 1980s Charger had no business wearing that badge. Unlike the Shelby-tuned models, which at least brought genuine performance to the table, the regular Charger was just another front-wheel drive compact. Its engines were forgettable, its handling average, and its personality non-existent. Buyers drawn to the famous Charger name were left wondering how such a heritage-rich badge ended up on a glorified economy car. While Dodge did offer the Shelby Charger to restore some credibility, the standard versions existed as hollow imitations. They served as a reminder that a great name alone can't save a car with no power, no charisma, and no staying power. Number 4. 1982 to 1986. Dodge Rampage Sport Truck. The Dodge Rampage was a curious creation, a car-based pickup built on the Omni platform. Dodge's marketing team decided to give it a sporty spin, but that was more ambition than reality. With early models producing around 84 horsepower, the Rampage was about as far from muscle as you could get while still being on 4 wheels. It offered practicality and quirkiness, sure, but it had no performance credentials to speak of. Calling it a sport truck only highlighted the gap between promise and reality. Enthusiasts knew better. This was an interesting niche vehicle, not a performance standout. Today, the Rampage is remembered more for its oddball design than for any serious attempt at speed. Sporty? Only on the brochure. Number 3. 1984 to 1986. Dodge Daytona base models. The Daytona was a car with potential, and the Turbo Z proved it could deliver excitement. But the base models told a different story. With naturally aspirated engines that lacked power and a reputation for shaky build quality, the standard Daytona left much to be desired. The sleek looks suggested performance, but unless you spent extra for the turbocharged versions, you ended up with a car that didn't live up to its own styling. Buyers lured in by the promise of a sporty coupe often discovered the base Daytona was all show and little go. This inconsistency left the model's reputation divided, with the turbo variants admired and the regular ones largely ignored. The lesson was clear. Looks alone don't carry the weight in performance cars. Number 2. Dodge Omni GLH. The Dodge Omni GLH had one of the boldest names of the 1980s, "Goes Like Hell." Unfortunately, before Carroll Shelby got his hands on it, that claim was generous at best. Early GLH models were essentially economy hatchbacks with sporty trim packages. They offered decent drivability and efficiency, but lacked the raw punch that the name suggested. They weren't slow for their time, but they weren't fast enough to earn respect among performance fans. When Shelby tuned the car, things improved dramatically, and the GLH finally lived up to its billing. But those pre-Shelby versions, they were little more than placeholders, carrying a name they couldn't quite live up to. Enthusiasts knew the difference, and history remembers the Shelby versions, not the early pretenders, the 6 best Dodge muscle cars of the 1980s. Number 1. Other front-wheel drive experiments. During the 1980s, Dodge seemed determined to reinvent itself through front-wheel drive platforms. The problem was clear. While some ideas worked, many so-called sporty models never came close to capturing the muscle car spirit. Lightweight badge engineering and styling tweaks gave the impression of performance without the substance. Engines lacked power, handling felt compromised, and the excitement that Dodge promised never materialized. A number of these cars came and went so quickly that few even remember their names. Collectively, they show a decade where Dodge was searching for identity, but often missing the mark. These experiments may have kept Dodge afloat during difficult years, but they did little to satisfy enthusiasts. The result was a lineup filled with cars that looked sporty but drove like everyday commuters. 1984 to 1987, Dodge Daytona Turbo Z. The Daytona Turbo Z was Dodge's bold play in the mid-80s, and it actually worked. Under the hood sat a turbocharged 2.2-liter four-cylinder, pushing as much as 174 horsepower depending on the year. That doesn't sound earth-shattering today, but in the bleak performance landscape of the 1980s, it was a genuine shot of adrenaline. Dodge paired that engine with handling upgrades and a body that looked the part, sleek, aerodynamic, and modern for the time. Inside, digital dashboards and electronic wizardry made the Turbo Z feel futuristic. Dodge had figured out how to blend looks, performance, and technology into something credible, and the result earned attention. Critics compared it to imports like the Mustang SVO and even some European hot coupes, and the Turbo Z didn't flinch. It was fast enough to put smiles on faces, and it proved Dodge still knew how to build excitement. While not a pure rear-wheel drive muscle bruiser, the Daytona Turbo Z carried the performance torch with pride. More importantly, it showed that Dodge was willing to take risks and fight for enthusiast buyers in an era where most brands were coasting on looks alone. 1987, Dodge Shelby GLHS. By 1987, Carroll Shelby had turned Dodge's modest Omni hatchback into something that nobody expected: the Shelby GLHS. Officially, the name meant "goes like hell s'more," a nod to the earlier GLH, but this car didn't need gimmicks to prove itself. It delivered over 175 horsepower from its turbocharged 2.2-liter engine, which was more than enough to embarrass cars twice its size. Handling was tightened up with Shelby's tweaks, giving the car a razor-sharp feel. It wasn't just quick in a straight line, it could carve corners with real authority. The GLHS became a cult hit because it broke every expectation of what a small front-wheel drive hatchback could do in the late 1980s. Production was limited, making it rare, but its legend far outgrew its numbers. Dodge handed Shelby the keys to an ordinary commuter, and he handed back a weapon that could take on V8s of the time and walk away with bragging rights. The GLHS didn't just keep Dodge's performance flame alive, it lit it up brighter than anyone thought possible. 1984 to 1989, Dodge Shelby Charger. The Shelby Charger was the comeback act Dodge desperately needed. While the base Chargers of the 80s were nothing to write home about, Carroll Shelby's touch completely changed the story. The addition of a turbocharged four-cylinder engine, paired with upgraded suspension and brakes, gave this compact coupe real bite. Horsepower figures climbed steadily, reaching 146 by the later years, which in that era meant you were genuinely fast compared to most rivals. The car also looked the part, with aggressive striping, Shelby badging, and a stance that separated it from ordinary commuters. Owners loved the fact that it was affordable, yet capable of punching above its weight. The Shelby Charger wasn't just about straight-line numbers either. Its handling and balance made it a fun driver's car. Enthusiasts quickly built a strong aftermarket scene around it, and the car became an icon in the growing sport compact segment. For Dodge, it was proof that the brand still had performance DNA left in its bloodline. And for buyers, it was proof that you didn't need to mortgage your house to get something quick and exciting. 1984 to 1989, Dodge Charger. The fourth-generation Dodge Charger carried a name heavy with history. And while the base models fumbled that legacy, the turbocharged variants redeemed it. With the addition of turbo power, Dodge gave the compact Charger a proper performance identity. These versions weren't just about cosmetics. They delivered real speed and brought back some credibility to a badge that enthusiasts had been skeptical about. Horsepower figures pushed into the 140s and later into higher ranges, depending on configuration, making the turbo models competitive with other sporty compacts of the time. Styling cues such as hood scoops, bold graphics, and Shelby-inspired design details made them stand out. But the performance was what sealed the deal. Buyers who went for the turbochargers found themselves with a nimble, quick car that didn't just trade on its name. These models weren't perfect, but they showed Dodge was capable of making the Charger badge mean something again, even if it wasn't in the same form as the classic muscle machines of the 60s. For the decade, the turbochargers were the best expression of Dodge's attempt to adapt performance heritage to a changing automotive landscape. 1983 to 1988, Dodge Omni GLH. The Shelby tuned the Dodge Omni GLH became one of the most talked-about performance bargains of the 1980s. Affordable, unassuming, yet genuinely quick, it flipped expectations on their head. Under Shelby's guidance, the Omni's 2.2-liter turbocharged engine made serious power for the time, allowing this little hatchback to run with cars far more expensive and prestigious. Handling improvements ensured it wasn't just quick in a straight line, and the lightweight platform amplified its agility. It wasn't flashy, and it didn't need to be. The GLH earned its reputation by backing up every claim with results. For young enthusiasts, it was an entry ticket to serious performance without draining a bank account. Dodge and Shelby managed to turn a practical commuter into a car that enthusiasts actually respected, which was no small feat in an era full of half-baked sport trims. The GLH also laid the groundwork for the Shelby GLHS, but even on its own, it left a mark. To this day, it's remembered as a no-nonsense machine that proved Dodge still had the courage to innovate when the rest of the market was playing it safe. 1986. Dodge Daytona. The Daytona Shelby Z represented the peak of Dodge's front-wheel drive performance cars in the 80s. Building on the success of the Turbo Z, this model carried stronger turbocharged engines, improved suspension tuning, and Shelby's performance refinements. With horsepower climbing toward 174, the Shelby Z was quick enough to hold its ground against respected competitors. More than just speed, it had a presence. The styling was sharp, purposeful, and undeniably cool for its time. Inside, drivers got performance-oriented touches that made it feel special without breaking the budget. The Shelby Z showed how far Dodge could push its front-wheel drive architecture, making it clear the brand wasn't just recycling old ideas. Enthusiasts appreciated its blend of technology, style, and genuine driving fun. It didn't try to be a muscle car from the past. Instead, it created a new kind of Dodge performance for the era. Today, the Shelby Z is remembered fondly as one of the bright spots of the 1980s lineup, proving that even in a decade known for underwhelming power, Dodge could still deliver something that made drivers feel alive behind the wheel. The 1980s will always stand as one of Dodge's most polarizing decades. This was the era when the company stretched the definition of muscle until it nearly snapped. Some cars wore badges that promised performance, but delivered little more than styling flourishes and underwhelming engines. The letdowns were real, and Dodge's muscle image seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Yet, the story doesn't end there. Dodge also used the decade to experiment, adapt, and even reinvent what performance could mean. The partnership with Carroll Shelby was a turning point, proving that ingenuity could overcome limitations. Turbocharging became more than a buzzword. It was Dodge's way of keeping speed alive when the industry was suffocating under regulations and economic uncertainty. Models like the Shelby Charger, Omni GLH, and Daytona Turbo Z may not have been traditional muscle cars, but they carved out a new identity, smaller, sharper, and surprisingly quick. The real achievement of Dodge in the 80s wasn't dominance. It was survival with ambition. By pushing technology like electronic fuel injection, aerodynamic styling, and forced induction, Dodge laid the groundwork for the high-performance revival of the 1990s. Enthusiasts may still argue about which cars deserve respect and which deserve ridicule. But no one can deny that Dodge kept the performance conversation alive when many others had gone silent. In the end, Dodge's 1980s lineup is best remembered as a collection of contradictions, failures that faded into obscurity sitting alongside cult icons that remain beloved today. The decade proved that even when circumstances were at their toughest, Dodge refused to fully abandon its muscle car spirit. That persistence is exactly what kept the brand relevant and set the stage for its future resurgence. That wraps up our breakdown of the 7 worst and 6 best Dodge muscle cars from the 1980s. Some of these cars disappointed, while others stood tall as proof that Dodge could adapt and still deliver excitement. Which of these cars do you think best represents Dodge's 1980s identity? Were the Shelby-tuned models enough to save the brand's reputation? Or did the decade mark a low point in muscle car history? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Dodge history, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more automotive breakdowns, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.